Welcome to our first episode of MIJ Fundamentals. Much like its sister series, MIJ Supplemental, we're digging into the finer details of vintage Japanese guitar production. But this time we're going big. And God help us, because we're really shooting the works on this one. There ain't no party like a fuzz party, and today's discussion will encompass the world of Japanese-made fuzz pedals. We've amassed a modest mountain of vintage rarities for today's discussion, and many of these pedals take inspiration from iconic USA or British fuzz designs like a fuzz face, Maestro FZ-1, tone bender, or big muff. And yet, there are unique circuits included here as well that profoundly reshaped the musical landscape. We've organized these pedals both by manufacturer, but also by general circuit type. This is a task I could by no means handle alone. And on today's show, we have with us the Guitar Bar's two in-house amp techs, Jesse Quitzland and Jim Roth. I'm truly humbled here at the Guitar Bar we get to work with talents of the caliber of Jesse and Jim, both of whom have their own effects pedal companies. Jesse builds under the Acme banner, and Jim's company is Germs with a J. So what is our intention with today's conversation? As the hows and whys of what makes a fuzz pedal go is a topic exhaustively covered elsewhere, we're only going to touch on those details as applicable. We're tackling a massive, deeply nuanced topic, and this isn't necessarily designed to be a comprehensive dive, but we are going to show you a bunch of rare, fun, and hopefully inspiring fuzz boxes from the 1960s and 70s, and demo as many of them as we can, too. Jesse and Jim have each curated this aspect of their private pedal collections for decades and have generously provided us with many of the pedals we have here today, augmented by some select gems from the Guitar Bar's current Japanese-made fuzz stock. Well, fellas, let's dive in. What was each of your entry points into this whole situation here?
Yeah, well, that's a easy question to answer because this was my entry point.
That exact one?
That's right.
Nice.
When I was 14, junior high school, I was working at a music shop in downtown DC, and there was an electronics tinkerer who hung out there, and he brought this in one day missing a foot switch and sold it to me, and I pulled a foot switch out of a Hurricane wah pedal that I had, which unknowingly was probably the exact right part to put in here. And then I also fixed it with a couple other parts that I pulled out of a old TV set that I found on the curb.
And you were 14?
Yeah.
You were already pretty deep in this at 14.
Well, I mean, this was my first guitar pedal of any kind, and then it served my high school 60s punk band very well, and was a few years later augmented by the Bruno fuzz machine there. That
with the sliders.
Yeah, that me and one of my bandmates bought a Pro Reverb and that out of the WAN ads.
Nice.
And those were the two fuzz pedals that my high school band used. And I've, despite collecting many other fuzz pedals since, Japanese fuzzes are kind of my first and deepest love, and especially these are both super fuzz circuits. I mean, this is obviously an early super fuzz.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much the same thing, and I kind of have had a hard time finding any other fuzz circuit that really floats my boat as much as the super fuzz. And there's a variety of super fuzz variants that we'll get to touch on here.
Yeah, I was wondering about that when you said this was your first and then this one came right after. I'm like, aren't these kind of doing the same thing?
Much.
But like any vintage fuzz, they're all going to have their variants and their flavor and their eccentricities. How about you, Jim? What got you into this?
A guy named Mike Johnson, who played bass for Dinosaur Jr. for a while, he had a Love Tone Big Cheese, and I love that thing, and that was my first intro to fuzz. And then he had the TR-8 Fuzz Wah.
Jesus and Mary Chain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It didn't work, and he just gave it to me, and that was basically my intro. And then I just started, collecting. Being with Built to Spill, having money, I could just buy, it was cool.
Yeah.
I could just kind of pick up whatever I saw at the time.
Were you buying a lot of those on the road?
Like that, like I said, that Apollo, I got that for $100 because the guy didn't know what it was, and I was like, oh, look at that. There was no price on it, and I was like, how much you want for this? He's like, trying to search Apollo on the internet, and since it's not Shin-Ei, he couldn't find anything that looked similar. Right. So he sold it to me for $100.
I have a list about 20 names long of all of the different.
Well, yeah, I've never seen an Oscar before. That's
what this one is.
Yeah, that's an Oscar. I mean, it's the same as that pedal there. It's just in a different enclosure with a different name on it.
We have Oscar, Royal, Apollo. I can't even. Kimbara?
Kimbara, yeah, which was a British brand. This came from the UK.
That's.
I would guess that Oscar was actually Oscar Schmidt.
Oh, no
because
kidding.
they were an importer and distributor in the States.
Well, like that Apollo, the Shaftesbury duo fuzz. That was the British labeling for that.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's
then
I forgot, I can't remember.
Yeah, well, Shaftesbury was a big British brand.
Somebody
guitars.
used it though, like that was their thing. I can't remember who though.
Well, I'm sure we'll find it in the B-roll.
Yeah,
It'll be
totally.
Shaftesbury Shin-Ei Fuzz will come screaming at the viewer, and then Companion being kind of maybe the most ubiquitous of the Shin-Ei.
Yeah, probably more made with that name than anything. Just because it was the Japanese. That's the Japanese name, right? I mean, or what they would have sold them under in Japan.
Yeah. Probably most prolific of the Japanese fuzz pedal brands. Yeah. And much credit to Fumio Mieda for circuit design, Univibe, Super Fuzz, FY-2. And I think we just should go back to your FY-2 in the box here, Jim.
I got lucky on that one.
Anytime we can get them in the box. My goodness.
The Radiohead bass fuzz.
Right. Is that exit music for a film, I think is potentially this guy, one of these. So Jim, can you unpack for me a little bit what's going on with the FY-2 circuit?
Sure, it's just a 2-transistor fuzz. It's kind of unique, though, to its own thing. It's got a weird filter on the end, which kind of makes it not unity gain. Well, the very first one they made of these were germanium, and they didn't have the same type of filter thing on it, and they're way louder. Like, these are not even unity, so, you kind of got to kick it with something else after you're...
You said the germanium ones are louder?
Way louder,
Way louder.
My buddy just got one. Like, he didn't know what he had. He bought it, and then he got it, and it was like we were comparing them, and it's just like way louder.
And this is going to be the silicon
totally.
Got it. And Jesse, we were talking a little bit off camera about some of the history of sort of Shin-Ei and can you give us some of that perspective?
Sure. Well, I mean, a lot of this is conjecture because... I'm sure there's probably some folks in Japan who've done some deep research on the designers, and that information is just a little hard to come by, translated into English. But one of my observations that we were talking about earlier was that, early in the 60s, Japan, electronic manufacturing really took off, and Shin-Ei is a large corporation in Japan, like, General Electric or maybe RCA or something like that in the US, and that they made all kinds of parts and, finished products, including, I would imagine we could probably find some, not Shin-Ei branded, but certainly Shin-Ei manufactured transistor radios, handheld transistor radios, which were a huge coup for Japan, exporting those miniature transistor radios. They really took over the marketplace kind of in the world when those were extremely popular in the early 60s. And I feel like a lot of the manufacturing techniques that we see inside these pedals owes a lot to the way they built their transistor radios in terms of getting things onto the little teeny tiny PC boards, standing up resistors, which is something that wasn't standard practice in the US or the UK. So I think a lot of the people who designed and did the manufacturing of these had a lot of experience with transistor radios and other types of kind of, like more consumer household type products.
The board in that is just a bit bigger than a postage stamp.
It's just a little tiny.
This too is like the tiniest PC board known to man. It's
tiny
like,
square.
Which is funny because it's such a large enclosure. And I'm sure a lot of the designers were, in the beginning looking at a Maestro FZ-1 or FZ-1A.
Oh, you mean one of these right here?
Exactly, yeah. And, this was the first commercially made fuzz box and, spawned kind of everything all over the world from what was happening in the UK to a lot of the early ones in Japan. And I think the Japanese designers kind of took some of those ideas and maybe some ideas from Fuzz Faces and later on Big Muffs and kind of ran with them and did their own thing, whether that was just using techniques and parts that were available to them, but also tweaking things a little bit. And I think, Jim's mention of the filter circuit in the FY-2 is interesting because I think, to my experience, that was a Japanese kind of innovation or something and the filter that you also see later on in the Super Fuzz is not something that you see in American made or
something that's not in a Dallas Arbiter fuzz face, not in an FZ-1 filtering circuit that we're seeing in the FY-2 Shin-Ei.
And later on in
the FY-6
Super Fuzz, and that's one of the things certainly that gives the really more uniquely Japanese pedals there.
They did the same with those DNSs.
Yeah,
they're big muffs, but the tone circuit's way different. It's way more usable.
Right. So you've given us so many different jumping off points here. I do want to get back to the 3-transistor Maestro fuzz tone thing. But first, since we're still in Shin-Ei land, let's talk about how we get from the FY-2 to the FY-6, probably arguably the most impactful Japanese fuzz pedal ever.
Yeah. I kind of think they might have came out with them at the same time, and the 2 was just the cheaper budget entry level one, and the FY-6 was like the pro one or whatever, you know what I mean, that had more parts and was probably more expensive,
That everybody would end up using.
Sure.
The Cramps would end up using, the Pete Townsend would end up using.
Jesus and Mary Chain.
Jesus and Mary Chain.
Mudhoney.
Yeah, all over the
everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
Pete Townsend. Yeah, I think. Did you say Pete?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, huge stamp on grunge with that. And we've got now, if I'm seeing this correctly from behind them, we have 3 different, 1, 2, 3, 5 different FY-6 variants happening here.
Another one here.
Another one there. There's another one hanging out here too. I'm looking for it. Where's the Royal? There's the Royal.
Yeah, that thing's a
that
monster.
one as well.
That thing's a monster.
This is not just FY-6 isn't just fuzz, right? We have an octave that's coming in on there as well,
definitely.
Right?
And like the later ones like that, there's a little trim pot. You can tune it, like get it right in the middle. So you get the best upper octave effect to it.
Later one being this
that
with
one,
the giant foot switch there.
Yeah.
So that's
the Townsend one.
Got it. And then that came in, I think, at least 3 or 4 different color variations, like a black one, a gray one.
Gray and black, black and green, and red and blue.
Right, the red and blue one that I think
orange
is
and blue. It's
right. Yeah.
Weirdest red.
And then, of the pedals we have here today, I guess aside from the FY-6, it has to be these FZ-1, FZ-1A Maestros.
Yeah, that's all of these right here.
Largest collection.
Well, one of these is not.
One of these is not like the others?
Actually, these 2 are the same, but they don't have the FY. It's like a 2-transistor. It's a little bit different. Same box.
Because this is a 3-transistor fuzz.
Yeah, totally. And a single, at least that's got a AA battery. I think the other ones take 9 volts.
Right. I think we have a couple
These
of
all
them.
take. Oh, this takes a 9 volt actually.
Yeah, some of these are 9 volts. Some of these are the single AA battery
Oh, no,
version.
it's a double. That's
there we go.
I'm wrong.
Secrets out. Jim, most of these are yours. Run me through.
I just had an obsession with.
Okay.
You know, I started out with the
Yeah.
the FC-1 and the FC-1As, and the gold knobs are always the best.
These one. That's where the tone is.
They sound way better for whatever reason. And then I just went crazy looking for any FC-1 I could find. You know, I would just scour, fuzz listings and Reverb or eBay or whatever. And anything that looked like this one, it was listed as whatever. And I looked at it and I was like, holy shit, that's an FC-1A with a little transformer in it. Like, I'd never seen anything like it. I've never seen anything since.
And what is this one? Do we even have a name on this?
No one knows.
No.
This is the mystery.
fuzz
It
box.
looks like the Ibanez.
This is tight.
It looks like the graphics look like the 83 Fuzz, if you've ever heard of. I don't have one. That's another very rare Japanese Fuzz. That's kind of its own unique thing.
And this one's running 2 AA instead of a single AA.
FC-1A, or as FC-1, not A, but with the 2 batteries. And that little transformer in there is crazy.
Yeah,
it's just nuts.
So what? Normally, we're not going to see a transformer in a circuit like this.
Never.
Not until the Octavia.
It's on the output. He's thinking it's some kind of impedance.
Probably an
matching
impedance matching thing, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Once again, I'm sure a radio part, that some designer was like, oh, it's better to put this in here.
So point of clarity for my edification, FZ1 versus FZ1A, most of these are in the FZ1A camp. And can you define for me what's the difference between that FZ1 and that FZ1A circuitry?
One takes 2 AA's and one takes 1.
Okay.
And then just the couple cap values are different, and then the transistors are different. But
no one really knows why Maestro switched it up, but certainly it would be cost saving to have 1 battery instead of 2. So that could be one factor. It could have been the availability of transistors or the price of transistors.
That's true too.
They may have gotten a screaming deal on the ones that they used in the 1A. And in a weird way, a lot of the Japanese, whether you want to call them clones or whether they're just sort of, they used the Maestro circuit as a jumping off point, there's a lot of different little tweaks they did. And, even though they look the same, identical, sometimes the later circuit, which is a 2 transistor circuit, actually sounds sonically, and I couldn't get too deep into the circuit of it, but it's a step in the direction of a super fuzz in that there's a weird octave component to it. And
In the Crestwood.
Yeah, in this is the 2 of the, can't remember what the model number is again, but it's F something, and there's the 1, which is the copy of the Maestro Fuzz, and then the 2 is a sort of a different, more Japanese type.
I thought it was printed on. I think it's an FA2.
Oh yeah, that's it. FA1 and FA2.
Yeah, you can see that takes the
9
volt battery instead of the AA's.
And they really sound, even though they're cosmetically the same on the outside, they're completely different animals sonically. And circuit-wise, yeah.
Totally.
Of our 3 mystery boxes that look otherwise identical, we have some profoundly different things happening circuit-wise.
And a lot of these, the black ones are fairly rare. It's more common to see these chromed Sakova branded.
Which are, again, Shin-Ei, the Sakova.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, totally.
And then the black ones, I don't know if they made those in smaller quantities. They certainly haven't aged as well, so maybe they decided they liked the chrome finish better from a production standpoint.
Sure. So the ace tone we've got here on the end, which is, hey, FZ1.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
okay, I'm learning. Ace tone really kind of gets us through the progression of Japanese fuzzes that are kind of mirroring some of those other USA designs, because
Well, that's probably the first one.
Right, our FM1. And then we get to the FM2 from Ace Tone, and it's mirroring the Shin-Ei FY-6 Super Fuzz situation. And then we get to the Fuzzmaster 3, and that gets us to Big Muffs.
Yeah.
And we've got, oh, we have so many Big Muffs here today.
An interesting thing worth noting too is, I mean, there's a whole bunch of kind of through lines from a design standpoint, not only circuit design, but the design of the enclosures here. You know, you can see all of these were inspired by the Maestro Fuzz-tone.
FZ-1.
And this sort of hinged bottom lid, which is great for changing batteries and for potentially servicing these pedals, continues all the way through these, later on to
Down to the Ace Tones.
the Ace Tone Fuzzmasters, and then later on the Roland Bebop and some Roland pedals. So
Look at that sucker. Well, so since we're kind of headed in the Roland direction here, from Ace Tone, the same founder created Roland and then eventually took us on to the Boss Compact stomp boxes, which we're not going to get into today. That's a whole different kettle of fish. So of the Rolands we have here, we have the Bebop, we have the BG.
BG's not pretty unique, isn't it?
yeah, and that's an early op amp based.
Really?
Yeah, in terms of our
Oh, that's true.
in terms of the sort of you know, historical timeline here, circuit wise, the BG is.
On the Barricade Talk Show, talking about jazz hat, talking about crazy cool medallions.
You know, historical timeline here. Circuit-wise, the BG is as late as it gets because it is getting into early op amps, a metal can op amp. And then there's probably in between these early ones and those are all the Big Muff variants, which are more early 70s kind of timing-wise. And then, of course, getting into the later Maxon Muff
Versions.
yeah, the evolution of the Japanese Big Muff.
So if we're talking op amps with the BG, is who's inspiring who here when we get to the op amp Big Muffs later in the game? Did the BG precede the op amp Big Muffs?
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and there were, I don't know in production, but certainly around the time the BG was made in the 70s, there were op amp fuzz designs floating around out there. I don't think anybody was really.
The Rat was probably coming up around that time too.
Oh,
As
right.
op amp.
Yeah. LM308 bass.
308N, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting too that Maxon, shifting gears from Roland Ace Tone to Maxon was certainly taking a lot of cues from Electro-Harmonix circuit-wise. And who knows how many different designers there were that in Japan that these could be attributed to. Probably a whole lot. And probably a lot of guys who were just electronics designers. They weren't people from like the music business per se, but they, you know, worked at Shin-Ei, like I said, designing transistor radios or hi-fi or whatever. And they, you know, it's like, oh, sure, I'll make a version of this circuit to create distortion rather than avoid it. And I think that's why you see so many different little variations and tweaks on things. I'm sure they were different people who were just kind of, you know, cooking up their own version of the recipe, and obviously filling a worldwide marketplace that was hungry for fuzz pedals, which is maybe a separate conversation. But you know, fuzz pedals just in the U.S. with the Maestro went from being kind of like unappreciated and nobody knew what to do with them to suddenly being the in sound of the 60s
for a very,
into
very
the
short
70s.
time. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you, Keith Richards.
Yeah.
Because they were, they made like a couple thousand of the early Maestros, and I think they were 5,000.
Yeah,
They're just sitting on shelves. Satisfaction happens, and then everything is gone.
Then they made 42,000 more.
Okay.
The serial numbers go up to 42 something. which is crazy.
Piece of information that you would have.
I've been jazzed by the FZ-1 and FZ-1A forever.
I'm assuming in germs you have built quite a few Maestro-inspired things.
Well, the FZ-1 directly leads to the Tone Bender Mark 1, and that's my trade. That's the one that made my name as germs, was making Tone Bender Mark 1s.
Not 1.5, but
the
Mark,
1. Yeah,
purely
exactly
the
same circuit with some tweaks and values and way more distortion than a regular FZ-1. You know, they really jazzed it. Gary Hurst, the guy from England.
Of course. Were you cracking into any of these as far as how you were flavoring the germs fuzzes that you were making? Did these inform that in any way?
No, I'm sticking with the basic, like the germs thing for me is to make it, like if you open it up, it should look exactly like what you would have bought in the 60s. So I'm trying to make identical copies of, say, the FZ-1, or I'm not trying to like,
you're not going outside the box, no pun intended.
Not at all. I'm trying to get the original parts and, you know, make it as authentic as possible.
Both of you, your vintage parts stashes are just
I just bought a whole
insane.
I just spent a few $1,000s on a bunch of old parts that this guy was hoarding. Wanted to be a builder, never really built much, and then he just let it all go. And I was lucky enough to buy a bunch of really great old English parts. You know, like European parts are just the hardest thing to find.
Sure.
Everything like that.
I mean,
Pretty
probably cool. For geography, but also for the demand over the last
definitely,
you know, over half century of people, everyone trying to have those things, to build those things, because there's a very finite amount of that stuff out there. So Big Muffs. Let's talk a bit more about triangle Big Muffs, and I mean.
Yeah, they pretty knocked it out of the park on those.
It's such a clone in form factor, control layout, really everything here. And I find it really interesting that we've got, this is obviously a triangle muff circuit, correct me if I'm wrong, but it says Super Fuzz on the box.
Well, yeah, this is the first, they probably got sued or had some cease and desist because they said Big Muff. It's hard to sometimes date these things. Not always. The Japanese parts don't always have date codes.
Don't have a source date code on there. So these three, Elk is a different company than we have with Sakova here, which is a pure Shin-Ei version of the triangle muff. We're gonna have to plug these ones in.
It's even got the Shin-Ei foot switch.
I love that. One of these is the shop's, but I think the other three are all from your collection, Jim. No?
Just these two are.
Just those two. Oh, well, man.
Is that the one I sold?
This one used to be Jim.
I sold it to him.
You guys. So we went from tone circuit wise, are these still roughly consistent with the triangle muff, or have they already redesigned that tone circuit?
No, definitely not.
Oh, okay.
That only comes in that era. The small boxes.
So when we get to this box,
or that variation of a Big Muff, that's when they changed the tone circuit.
Because the Maxon DNS's was it OD801? Those are all a 4-transistor triangle Big Muff, early 1970s situation. And if I've got this right, is this one our first The
No,
OD801?
This one's the
sustained.
very first
This
one.
is the one with
sustained
the taint?
teeth. Yeah.
Yeah.
And those are the same as the orange OD. What are they? They're the Ibanez ones. They're orange.
Right,
They're the
right,
exact-
right.
just
Yes,
don't
I can't
have
think
one.
of what the
They're
model-
like so much more expensive than those, and they're the same. Like the board
Same
is
board,
exactly
yeah.
the same.
Because
There's not a difference at all, except for the cosmetics.
Ibanez was for worldwide exports.
Right, and that's the Japanese market.
That's the Japanese market one. So we've got the Sustain T font comes first.
That's next.
Then this
Yeah,
one.
yeah.
Then it
Then
gets
that
us
one.
to the
Yeah.
OD801. And when we've evolved from this version of the triangle muff to this smaller form factor Maxon version, we have a profoundly different tone circuits. And Jim, you were saying much more usable than what we have here. Jesse, can you kind of unpack for us what those differences are?
Sure. And I think it's worthy of mentioning, too, that once again, looking at the whole history of fuzz circuits, as much as the Univox Super Fuzz circuit was revolutionary, number one. Number two, much more complicated from a parts standpoint and just the complexity of the circuit to previous fuzz circuits. The Big Muff came along, being designed by Electroharmonics, and was also equally sophisticated, kind of, the next evolutionary leap in terms of a circuit design. But starting with the very first US-made Big Muffs and going really for years through Big Muffs, their Achilles heel was the tone control, which has a sort of limited usable range, and typically most players find sort of a sweet spot, but is not a very functional control. A lot of it is way too bright or way too woolly and muffy sounding
much tie off.
to really be used. And that is one of the things that you can hear the Japanese versions of these tweaking over the years. And whether that was at first just some small component changes or a slightly more kind of redesign of a tone circuit, which I think you could attribute to these later Maxon ones, it just gives you a tone control that you actually can use across the full sweep, rather than there being these little sweet spots and everything else being
like
either
one
too
really
bright
good
or-
spot. It's got plenty of spots in the range where you get a different tone out of it.
Am I right in saying that when they redesigned that circuit, it maintains more bass so you don't have a perceived drop at certain points on the dial?
that's part of, I mean, it's just
It's not as scoopy.
it
It adds more mid-range, I think, to it compared to like a triangle or even a ram's head.
that's the addition of any kind of tone circuit to a fuzz, which also sort of happens in the Super Fuzz, which is also a very scooped, for that matter, mid-scooped
no kidding.
tone, but one that works really well, especially in the context of a whole band. And I think that is one of the challenges for the Big Muff tone stack, is not only is it not super usable when you're just playing guitar all by yourself, but in the context of a band, a lot of the tone on there just disappears in a wall of mud. And in a weird way, is a little bit more suited to bass than guitar, because sometimes as a bass player, it's okay to just sort of have this woolly bottom without a lot of cutting highs to go along with it, which is one of the reasons Big Muffs are popular with bass players, which is not true for a lot of fuzzes.
Sure, where you've got that low end is just not there.
It's funny, Maskus made it work so well.
Yeah.
Well, that's because his muff is weird. It's a weird circuit change. There's a wrong resistor or something in there.
And you're referring to the one that Tim with a Y Tim reverse engineered as the Fuzz Munchkin.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
It's
a hell of
very
a pedal.
cool sounding. Yeah, that's probably why he made it work, was because it was actually not like a regular Big Muff.
Sure.
On a funny historical note, too, Maestro saw fit to include this circuit in a bass.
Oh, yeah.
And
Oh, is that the same with the circuit that's in an EB3F?
And some of what I've read theorizes that the onboard version actually predated the
that's very well.
of these.
Very well could be. Yeah, because usually those are FC1s, double 2 batteries instead of one.
In the
bases,
when it's built
in
into the
bases,
base.
Yeah.
Got
I
it.
actually saw a double neck with
Oh, cool.
One built into it
Nice.
too.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it was a 6 in base. And
Oh,
it had,
wow.
Had the fuzz built into it.
Wow.
Like in between, like in the middle. It was crazy.
With the neck switching.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, dude, that's nuts. I think we've got to talk about how you've got the USA versions. You got the original, say, triangle muff, and then those were iterated on, and now we have all these versions. And then notable players like is it Wada from
Wata.
Boris
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that plays the elk version. Those are now being cloned by USA companies.
Yeah. Or there's a Japanese guy making them too, the elf.
Oh, I didn't even
Yeah.
see the elf
Yeah,
ones.
he uses that logo right there. It's really cool. It says elf instead of elk.
Nice. I was thinking of I think Earthquaker actually has
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Hazumi,
a signature one
not Hazumi.
for her now.
Yep.
I really like the sound of those next to the Big Muff. I couldn't qualify. There's just
This
something
one's
about
a
'em.
monster. That's for sure.
You know, I think you asked a question before we started taping this that led Jim and I to wonder why there weren't more Fuzz-right inspired Japanese pedals, because they were like, you know,
I don't know if there's any.
avidly knocking off
Everything else.
everything else. and Mose-right was a very popular brand in Japan due to the
Absolutely
popularity of
massive.
the Ventures there. And the Fuzz-right in many ways is the same way the Maestro is kind of a source of the Nile circuit. The Fuzz-right was a very early production, commercially made fuzz in the U.S. and influential and knocked off by tons of people in the
unique,
States.
too.
And you know, you can kind of see the history of that circuit finds its way even into the 70s, kind of in some U.S. made pedals. But I don't have any explanation for why we're not looking at a whole pile of Japanese knockoffs too, because it's a simple circuit. It's great sounding. There must have been some in Japan. I don't know why nobody bothered to clone them as long as they were doing everything else here.
I mean, anything that's
a mystery.
Ventures related, you would expect
Yeah.
to have seismic impact within Japan in the era,
Mm-hmm.
especially for a band that is just guitars out
Yeah.
front. So interesting that we don't really have the Fuzz-right thing happening here. So there's a few of these that kind of are unique. We haven't hit everything yet, guys. Turns out.
Mm-hmm. That's right. Well, there's the Fuzz Waz, which is almost a whole other conversation.
Sure. The Aria. I understand that this is Big Muff in nature, but with the asterisk of without the recovery stage.
Exactly. It's like a
Jumbo
tone bender. Yeah.
Yeah, color sound
Exactly.
situation.
So it's barely unity. Like it just barely gets to where your original signal is, you know.
Can you unpack for me what that means as far as like, so when you're removing the recovery stage from this?
That's the problem is the tone circuit sucks it out, and then they put the recovery stage in to make up the gain that the tone circuit sucked out. So every time you add a tone circuit, usually you're going to lose some level, you know, because you're either shunting something to ground or, you know, you're adjusting what's going through the circuit, you know. So to have a recovery stage, it brings it back up to unity or above. You know, usually you want it to be louder. So
with fuzz,
Exactly.
many times that would be the goal.
I mean, it's cool sounding, but it's definitely barely makes the same volume as your clean sound.
Not one that maybe why it's one of the rarest ones that we have here
That's
today.
probably true. They made a smaller one too in the same box, but I don't know if it had the tone control. But yeah, obviously you can see that Super Fuzz Sustainer. It's probably a direct descendant.
Or at least marketing wise.
Yeah, totally. Well, and they're both Big Muffs.
They're both Big Muffs, right? But these ones would have had that
exactly.
extra stage,
Yeah.
so it's bringing it back above unity and
Yeah.
making them meaner and louder and wilder. Okay, other weird ones. Univox Square Wave.
The Oddball.
Yeah, exactly. Our Univox Square Wave, the odd man out. Jim, what can you tell me about this pedal?
It's one transistor and a JFET with diode clipping, kind of like a Boss Tone or
Is it Governor? Is that diode clipping? Marshall Governor?
yeah, but
Later.
it's more of an op amp. setup, you know, kind of like a rat. But yeah, definitely a unique thing.
I'll take anything that has a wheel too, that I can potentially.
Those Maestros are so good.
Maybe even give a roll.
Balls.
Oh, yeah,
Maestro
exactly.
phaser.
Now, what is the? Is it the phaser?
It's the phaser's got balls on it. Yeah.
Doesn't there's a fuzz version of that as well, though, right?
Oh yeah, the MIJ.
Yeah.
Fuzz and
That's
the Fuzz
right.
Tain.
And the Fuzz stain is cool too. That's a great one.
All right, last of our weirdos to highlight here, the monocore Fuzzder that's really ripping off the Fender font pretty hard, and it's solid state,
Yeah,
guys. Just in case we had any doubt on
That's
how we
another
needed
FZ-1
to market it.
copy.
Okay, so this lives in this this family.
Totally.
I mean, I suppose that makes a lot of sense, but it's just such a wider footprint.
Yeah, it's such a cool box too.
And monocore, does that fall? Is that another Shin-Ei in Wolf's clothing or in Sheep's clothing?
Idea. Really? I mean, they made it that under several different names other than monocore.
Oh, okay.
There's a few different ones.
Yeah, you'll see that with a whole
Are they all called
bunch of-
Fuzzder though? I
whole
don't think
bunch
they're
of-
even all
no,
called
No,
Fuzzder.
some of them don't even call them a fuzz. Some of them are
Right.
called like distortion or something.
Yeah, yeah.
But there are probably as many just different brandings of that particular pedal.
Oh, the Micatone. There's a
Micatone.
one.
There's just a whole bunch, and generally speaking, too, it's worth noting that both in the UK and the US, there were a dozen plus large music importers, distributors that had brand names. I mean, for instance, Univox was a brand owned by Unicord, which was a US-based company, and despite the fact that a lot of that stuff came from Japan, the brand name was American.
And that's probably why we saw a lot of these come stateside, the
Like
Super
this-
Fuzz specifically.
Yep, this Univox was definitely imported by Unicord, and that one was later on too. That's more of the 70s logo. But most of these names that we see here, Crestwood, Bruno, the Bruno Fuzz Machine. Bruno was a Midwest distributor.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then in the
Look at that.
yeah, and then in the British, as we mentioned,
Kimbara,
the Kimbara was a British brand name, and I'm sure Royal, there may be a story behind that too. But a lot of those names had origins outside of Japan, and these Japanese manufacturers were slapping anybody who wanted to buy 100 or 1,000 or whatever their minimum
Put their
order
name
was.
on
They'd
it.
put their name on it.
Kind of like early Electro-Harmonics making the Guild.
Yep.
The Foxy Lady.
Yeah, the Foxy Ladies.
Yeah, or Marshall amps that were branded different things.
Sure.
That's just kind of how the music business worked in those days. It was fairly regional and smaller companies without a lot of large, I mean, even Fender had some sub-brands. in the
Companies
60s.
that wanted their name on a fuzz pedal, like the LD heater ones, the Lyles from the West Coast that were big muffs, but made by Electro-Harmonics, but they had somebody else's name on it.
Well, Jesse, Jim, it's not every day that I get you both in the same place with all of this. So what have I missed? What should we touch on? What do the people need to know?
Yeah, I don't know. We've covered a lot so far.
Should we just plug them all in?
I think we should
and
probably
just see what
plug some in
happens
and let people hear them.
Okay. Jesse, Jim, thanks so much again for taking
You
the
bet.
time. Super appreciate it.
Anytime.
Sure.
For more on a wide range of vintage Japanese fuzz boxes in the Guitar Bar's inventory, and also to connect with us for vintage amp and pedal repair services, hop on over to mmguitarbar.com. And we'd love to know some of your favorite vintage Japanese fuzzes. What did we miss? What are you curious about? And what would you like to see us tackle on future episodes? Please drop us a comment below, subscribe to the channel, and as always, stay tuned for more content. Well, fellas, this has been fine, I guess. And maybe we'll do it again. I don't know.